Welcome to Strategy and Tea, episode 10. Today we are traveling to New York. Our guest is Erin Kendall. She's a strategic consultant and a postdoctoral researcher who studies the cognitive neuroscience of learning, memory, and decision making. She's going to share with us how the power of feedback can help you as an online course creator. So let's dive in. Welcome, Erin Kendall. Thank you for accepting my invitation. I am delighted to have you for this interview.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Remy. Everybody calls me Kendall. It's my middle name. And so you should call me Kendall too.
Okay, thank you. So, please tell us about your story and how you got involved in the neuroscience of learning.
So I have a PhD from Columbia University studying the learning, memory, and decision making, and particularly through a cognitive neuroscience lens. So cognitive neuroscience is like the intersection of neuroscience and psychology. And so basically, I have spent a lot of time thinking about how people think and how the brain supports that thinking, and just really like deeply immersed in the different ways that people think and make decisions. And so I was basically intending to be a professor where I do research and, a professor where I teach and I have lots of teaching experience. And basically, I got really sick while writing my dissertation. So I had to take a year off. The good news, my doctors were like, oh, you can go back to work. But unfortunately, they told me I could go back to work in the end of January 2020.
Oh,
So that was I had a very poorly timed global pandemic. And basically, that caused me to need to kind of pivot what I was doing. And so while I was in that pivot period, I had all these people come up to me and be like, hey, Kendall, I'm working on this project and we're stuck. Would you mind just kind of coming in and helping us sort it out? And I was like, sure. And they're like, how much do you charge? And I was like, I do it for free. And that was just sort of the way that I essentially became a consultant, is that people just kept coming up to me asking me for more or less strategic advice about solving problems. And so over time, I've kind of honed that. And what I'm doing right now is a lot of consulting with people who are creating products designed to make the world a better place. Given that my dissertation was on things like learning and memory, a big corner of what I do is helping people create online courses that are, frankly, more effective than they were before. I think anybody who's ever taken an online course knows that a lot of them are pretty terrible. But there's no reason why the medium of online learning has to be bad. And so what I do is I often collaborate with online course creators to help them make courses that actually deliver the transformations that they promise, and using what I know about psychology and neuroscience.
that's lovely. I love that you had them to get the transformation for the student in a more effective way, because at the end of the day, this is the most important part. What is the outcome that your course or your program is going to give your audience
Yeah.
or your students? So,
Courses that are incredibly effective sell themselves, right? That it's just like
yeah.
the word of mouth. People are like, oh, I was dealing with this. And someone's like, oh, here's how I dealt with it. It was this one course and it solved my problem. So I think sometimes in the online course creation world, there's a lot of emphasis put on like excellent marketing and communicating that transformation that you're going to promise. And I think sometimes that's to the detriment of making sure that that course actually delivers the promise that you put out there. And so I really like to focus on, making changes in the world that, result in better transformations.
Yeah, lovely. So if we go into the topic of today that will be related to the feedback, I I would love to know your opinion how feedback can help an online course creator.
Yeah. So I'm going to actually take a step back from that. I
Yeah.
know most people have heard of the neurotransmitter dopamine. And when people think about dopamine, they usually think of it as being the reward neurotransmitter. And that's not without good reason. If you experience something, if you get an unexpected reward in your life, for example, maybe an aunt sends you a card with like, a $50 check in it. That is going to stimulate, you're going to get dopamine in your brain. So that's great. The thing is that dopamine actually is released in much broader context. And in fact, ongoing research is just showing that there's more and more situations in which dopamine is released. Now, when dopamine is a neurotransmitter that actually only has a few neurons in the base of your midbrain that make dopamine, and they have oftentimes very long axons that project that send that dopamine to other parts of the brain. That can be anywhere from the hippocampus, the the prefrontal cortex. There's a lot of cortical dopamine, and also striatum, and part of the basal ganglia also gets a lot of dopamine innervation. And so that results in actually a whole bunch of different effects in the brain. So dopamine is really important for learning. It's really important for making new habits. It's really seems to be critical for motivation. It's important for attention and modulating attention. And it's also important for taking things in short-term memory and moving them into long-term memory.
Okay.
So for course creators, those are the things that we all care about. Now, the good thing is that what we're finding out more and more is that when dopamine gets released, anytime our expectations are violated, or we get any, which is another way of saying we get any sort of feedback. So as a course creator, we can't always be giving people rewards. We can't always be mailing them checks or, giving them candy or any of those things. But one thing that we can be doing is giving really consistent feedback. And so what I do is I work with one of the things, it's just kind of a subset, but one of the things I do is I work with course creators to figure out what is the right type of feedback that they can be giving their people in their programs to be making sure that they're reinforcing the goals that they want to achieve.
Yeah, that was amazing. Thank you for the explanation. Now, please talk about the most common myth around feedback.
Yeah. So it's not even a myth. I think it's just the pervasive belief is probably a better way to phrase it. But a quick review of the courses, be them asynchronous courses, real lifetime courses, some sort of hybrid community type programs, any of the above. There's almost no feedback. So just even focusing on the asynchronous courses, how many courses do you know of that the participant just sits there and just watches passively, right? And oftentimes really long videos, and they're monotonous and they're boring. And it's like, oh, if I record 8 hours of me staring at a camera, it's going to somehow make something happen. And just everything that we know about learning, people need feedback to learn. And so we need to figure out creative, innovative ways, even in an asynchronous setting, that people can get that feedback so that they get the transformation that's promised.
And could you give us an example of how you give feedback to an asynchronous type of course, for example?
So an asynchronous course or asynchronous? Yes. Okay, an asynchronous. Yes. So one of the things that I really look at or I dissect when I work with my clients is what kind of transformation are you promising? So for example, maybe you just want your people to learn or memorize new information, right? It's just like acquiring information. That's different than if you want them to learn a new skill. Which if is different, then it's a slight variation, but sometimes you just want them to develop new behaviors. Sometimes you want people to design new habits or create new habits in their lives. And sometimes you just want to create a course that just raises people's attention towards an issue. And the thing is for each one of those different types of programs, so far that's I think all the types that I've run across so far, you really want to design the feedback that's right for it. But let's just pretend you're designing a course where you want to improve memory. It's kind of a simple thing. I want you to learn new information.
Okay.
In that case, you can actually just design you can do quizzes within the course. So it's like, if I just want you to memorize information, I might present you with, 8 minutes of information, and then immediately thereafter give you a quiz on the most important parts of that information, right? And especially even just knowing that there's a quiz coming up is a really powerful tool that actually changes the way that students or learners take in information. So saying oh, here's this, I know there's gonna be a quiz. You don't even need to publicize the score. It's just I'm not gonna tell anybody. It's just an assessment for you to figure out how well you know this information that you're trying to learn. So sometimes it's even easier if I have the quiz on paper at home so that nobody feels like they're being tested, right? Or it's even in kind of the way that you would be doing this in a lecture course. Is maybe I'm doing lecturing, I'm teaching about the brain and dopamine, and now I would be all right, what is like, why do we want to give feedback? And now I just do like that silent pause. Where if you're paying attention, you'd be like, oh shoot, what did she just say 5 minutes ago? Right? So it doesn't like, and depending on the course type and the material, we do a lot of tailoring to what's right. So when I think about tailoring feedback to the situation, I always think like, okay, who's the person delivering it? Who's the creator? Who's the audience, and what's the transformation that they're promising, and really look for a fit between those things. So sometimes, somebody who has a lot of personality and joie de vivre can take like kind of a game show host approach to it, where it's like fun and gamey and da-da-da. I personally probably can't deliver that with aplomb, right? Like I just don't have that skill. I'm just not funny enough. And so, especially like recording something in my apartment by myself, like I just don't have it. But other people do. And so we can use, just like a bit of comedy to be inserting that material. Other times things are much more somber, and sometimes students are looking for some sort of certification. And so in the certification certain scenario, I find students are like want to be practicing the material in the same way that it's going to be on the test. So it's like, hey, you're going to be taking this test to get the certification. We are going to have you practicing those test questions throughout, so that you don't have to be scared about the format it looks like. You're gonna have so much practice there. You're gonna be ready for it, because we're going to be inserting these test questions throughout learning. So it's like, oh, and that motivation, given the transformation promised and the students and their motivations, we can employ a different type of test scenario, quiz scenario, or feedback scenario in that state. So there's never one size fits all. I found a lot of different things work really, really well. And so it really depends on the particular client that I'm working with.
But yeah, really interesting. You give us several examples so we can make an idea about what do you meant. So thank you for this. Now, another question that I would like to ask is, what would you say is the biggest objection that your customers have and you help them to address?
Yeah, again, it's not quite an objection, but it's people don't know that people like me exist in the world. So I think it's not so much an objection, it's an awareness issue. So a lot of times I'm like, oh, here's the kind of work I do. And they're like, oh, I wish I could use you. And I talk to them and I was like, oh, your problems that you're dealing with right now are exactly the kind of problems that I deal with. Or I help people, I work with my clients to solve. Like, it's always a collaborative process. I don't have the content. I love working with people who are really, really experts in their material. They just, don't have expertise on the learning, the memory, and decision-making aspect. So I feel like usually my best projects, there's a lot of synergy between the people coming with the information and I'm coming with kind of different ways to facilitate them getting that information to their people, or getting that transformation to their people. So I find it's not so much an objection. It's mostly an awareness issue. So it's nice to have an opportunity right now just to let people know that I exist, and that I offer. Basically, I can do either very short scenarios where I work with people just for a day, a half day, and really work on their course in a very intensive way, all the way up to very long-term engagements, depending on the product that they're designing.
Yeah, that's lovely. And yeah, sometimes one of the problems that as a service provider we could have is that it's like our potential customer doesn't know that we can help them to solve that problem. So the first step is just making them realize that, yes, this problem that you have, I can have a solution for you.
Yeah.
So it's lovely that you share with us.
Yeah. I find also my clients usually have tried a few other things and they know it's not working. And I feel like oftentimes there's like this uncomfortable thing. And I think oftentimes like they know deep down that it's not working. And then oftentimes that translates them feeling a little extra uncomfortable in the selling process. Because they're like, they know that what they're promising doesn't quite work. And that makes it really uncomfortable to be selling in an authentic, way with integrity. So I feel like that's a thing that happens a lot. And also times they just feel stuck. There's a lot of very generic advice floating around. Like one of the things that I work with my clients with, especially is if they're designing new programs with new habits. And for some reason, there's a lot of garbage floating around the habits world. And so it's like, oh, you need to do the habit for 21 days. And that's not true. And the length of time that you need to develop a habit really depends on the habit and the other things like the individual, their motivations, how big the outcome is, how frequent it is. I kind of use the example, it does not take 21 days to develop a cocaine habit. And there's a whole bunch of variables that really design that. And so, it's like, oh, but we did exactly what I heard I was supposed to do. And I'm like, well, your situation, I think that's actually something that is integral to the work I do, is because I've spent so much time thinking about learning, memory, and decision-making. I see kind of how many variables there are. And so it makes me reject any sort of one-size-fits-all approach to the work I do. And it's really about looking at the particular, the creator, who they are as a person. Everybody brings different strengths to the table. And so, we need to design something with those in mind, thinking about who they want to work with. And they have different motivations, different goals, different approaches, different time levels, different levels of commitment, taking that into account. And then also thinking about the transformation. And, sometimes it's like saying, this is not a realistic transformation to offer in, a 3-hour session. Like, it's not going to happen. And so how can we either frame it differently or, think about the right format to be delivering that transformation in. So given how much permutation there is, I would just encourage anybody to be really reluctant about any sort of cookie cutter or template advice.
I love that you bring that. It's like when one of the things about personal branding, that is one of the things that I help customers with, is about embracing your uniqueness. And I love that you bring how important it is to take into consideration the creator itself, the audience that this person is going to focus on, because this is important, and that combination is unique, and you need to take into consideration this before you make a decision about the kind of program that you are offering and how you are going to help them. So love that you bring that to the table.
Well, especially people who are really, really experts in what they do. There's always some sort of, synergy that they have, or energy, or, element that they are bringing to the table. And I think sometimes people don't even recognize how powerful that can be. So, for example, I've worked with a woman, and she is like a really funny, hilarious, silly person. But when she was making her courses, she went into somber, like, law professor mode, right? And I was like, well, why are you hiding the best part? I shouldn't say the best part, but you know what I mean? Like, this like vibrant aspect of your personality, given that attention is so important in learning. Like, you can't get anything in. You can't make any changes without attention. And so how do we take advantage of that? Now, for somebody else who's more introverted, there are definitely ways to design a course that takes advantage of an introvert's strengths, right? They tend to be very sensitive to nuances, and they tend to be able to kind of talk and communicate in a way that just connects with people in this like one-on-one way, such that everybody in the audience or everybody who's receiving that material feels like they're connected. And so that's, I think, really an opportunity. And so I don't hate the phrase lean in, but it's like, how do we take advantage of that? I think is probably the best way to phrase it.
Yeah. And also it's really important what you mentioned about the expectations, because if you know for sure what you are offering and how you are offering this transformation, you can set the expectations so your audience doesn't get disappointed when they started the program and actually they are not receiving what they were expecting. So having clear the expectation is also one of the things that I found that it's really important. And as you said before, for selling is going to help you be confident about the offer that you had, and knowing that the product that you are delivering is really good and is helping the people to really get that transformation. So really
great
important.
Programs sell themselves. I mean, if you have a program that people are raving about, and they're posting about it in every social media space, and they're just, when they're talking to their friends and colleagues, and, they're just like, hey, I had that problem too, and I solved it just by taking this course. Done, fixed. That makes your selling project way, way easier.
Yeah, I love this. Okay, so when working with your clients, what is your number one recommendation for them?
Ooh, I think just as I've already said, I really don't find that I have a number one recommendation, because what works for you is not going to work for everybody. And I would say, okay, my number one recommendation is to ignore any sort of cookie cutter advice and to really think about what you want to accomplish and who you are, who your people are, and what that transformation is. And every single decision along the way needs to be guided by those three factors.
Yeah, I agree, and I love that recommendation about really pay attention. And this related when with the tip of validating your course or your offer, because first you need to really know what you want to offer them
Yeah.
and prepare before you because you can deliver in several ways. You should take the way that is more effective for your people and also for you as a deliverer at the one delivering. So absolutely.
On the topic of feedback, for the clients who I have more long-term engagements with, one of the things that we always incorporate into that project, or usually I should say, is looking, how do we find feedback for the course creator? So before you go make a 21-month program, can you offer little snippets and give it, or sell it at a very low price to your ideal person, and say, hey, what's working here, what's not working here? If they can't get through the video, it's too long. Are they not filling out the worksheets? Are they, what components here, what's actually happening, and getting feedback before you invest a whole bunch into a big program. That's going to help you learn as a course creator how to create a better course. So the feedback actually works both ways. You want to gather as much feedback as you can as you're designing courses and as you're working with material to make sure that it's really working. So sometimes I would say I interview a lot of students. Another thing I do is audit courses and also work with interview past course members or learners to see what they think. And I've yet to run across a learner who was impressed by a pre-recorded live video. 100% they hate them. So that is something to keep in mind. But the first time you run a course, there's no reason, sometimes under the right circumstances, doing a live version where you can be adjusting the course in real time to your students can then be really, really powerful. And then once you've done it real time and you've gotten some feedback there, then saying, okay, now that I've piloted this, I've done some experimenting, I know this was working really well, I talked to the students and they want this time. I found that the students were able to make these changes, but they weren't always making these changes. These were the places where they were dropping out. All right, taking all that information, bringing that to some sort of collaborative session with somebody like me, and then we can work through different ways that we can retool or redesign the course so that it is really powerful. Is, I think, a really, really great approach. So that is to say, I'm glad you brought that up. As service providers, we can always be looking for ways that we can constantly be searching for feedback so that we can be improving the work that we do.
Yeah, and this is related also when validating before creating your course or your program, about asking your potential learners what they have tried before and why didn't work for them, because this giving you so much powerful information. Maybe is they don't take the time for actually doing the exercise or the different tasks that they need to do. Then you can approach this when you are going to create your program, because you know that this is a problem from them. So before that, you already know, and you are creating solution for the potential problems that they will have to finish that course.
Yeah. So just on that note, one of the things that I really work with my clients about is for people who are looking to have people acquire a new skill, oftentimes the thing that they're doing is just presenting information passively. And there's basically, it's a kind of akin to saying, I'm going to show you 4 hours of video on the steps you need to do to ride a bike, and then expect that person to be able to ride a bike, right? It doesn't work. And so, if you're going to teach somebody how to ride a bike using videos, they need to be riding the bike along the way and getting support and feedback around that. And so anybody who's looking for, trying to design a course to develop a new skill is going to need to be doing it and getting feedback. And so in a real-time program, that's easier oftentimes, especially if there's a delay, if there's a time component to it, or the course extends for a while. But even in that case, there's challenges about getting the person to actually do it when they're very busy. So that's something to always be considering. And the other thing to be working on is that, I'm working right now with some people who have asynchronous courses. And how do you get somebody the feedback they need to, the bike learning feedback when they're in an asynchronous course? And I think that's very challenging, but not impossible.
Maybe the extension of e-learning and online programs because of the pandemic is going to help to exponentially change that or improve that ways, because more people are getting involved in this, so more brains are thinking about different ways to solve that. So maybe we are also going to watch some advance on that as well.
Yep. It is an exciting time to be thinking about learning, just because the formats and the ways that we're learning are really changing. And I think in some of those ways it can be very detrimental, as anybody just thinks about the terrible online courses that they've taken. But I think there's still a lot of power in the medium, and there's a lot of opportunity there. And there's also the possibility of reaching people who wouldn't have the opportunity to be reached any other way. And so that, I think, just opens up a lot of doors of possibility and opportunity. And so, however, I think we need to be doing it right and really thinking strategically about how do we design these courses, and not just like throwing information spaghetti on the wall and hoping that you've made a decent dinner.
Yeah, especially nowadays, I feel that some people are focusing too much on the marketing side and the sales and all that, but let's say funneling to the leads and all that stuff. But you need to make sure that what you are offering is a good product service offer. It's going to say what you are promising, and you can be confident putting yourself behind that, because you know that this is something that is valuable.
Yep. I completely agree.
Yeah. I would like to ask you a final tip, especially for beginners. What would you recommend starting?
All right. So I think most beginners, the mistakes I see most often amongst beginners is they assume passive learning is going to work. And it's very rarely that, the law school monotony, and I don't blame the law teachers. I've actually never been to a law school lecture, so I have no idea. But that just is that kind of like passive monotonous learning just doesn't work. So let's not do that. I think oftentimes videos tend to be really long and oftentimes not organized. We know that people learn through very associative structures, so you need to have a structure to those videos, and oftentimes short videos that really have like each of them a piece of that structure work better. I think kind of to go back to people on not being boring. What can we do to not be so dreadfully boring? I think that can range from telling stories, or just letting your personality shine through, or some people are really good about using illustrations or metaphors or interviews. Sometimes even like there's no reason why you have to be the only person on screen. So there's just different ways that you can make the material more digestible. Illustrations are nice. Reading slides is terrible. Too many words on slides is terrible. Having just one format, like sometimes just the process of oscillating between different formats can be really helpful. And then, as I've already said, people need feedback to learn. So how are you how are you integrating that into your style of teaching? And how can you do that better? There's always room for improvement.
Well, thank you very much. These are super valuable tips, and I really appreciate that you are taking the time to share with us this. Now, a question that I like to ask all my guests is, what is the compliment from a client that has touched you the most?
The one that happens over and over is just relief. Usually there's this, people feel really uncomfortable around something, and there's just this like dread in the pit of their stomach usually, or like just like this like kind of wincy feeling. And that can be from just not knowing how to proceed, and to have a collaborator or a partner with you while you're creating a course can be really powerful. To create a good long course, obviously you don't need this for a shorter course, but for a kind of a prolonged program, that is a big undertaking. And to have a partner in that, I think can oftentimes bring a lot of relief. And also, I think the other area that people have a lot of relief is that they've tried things and they've tried conventional wisdom and it's not working, and they just don't know where to turn. And so to get somebody whose expertise comes kind of thinking about learning and memory and decision making and all these things, but kind of from a different angle, means that the hackneyed ideas that are kind of floating around in perpetual loop are not the ideas that I usually come to the table with. And so I just kind of have a fresh set of eyes and a fresh set of thinking and a fresh set of ideas. And so oftentimes I do a lot of unstucking of people. And so overwhelming, it's just like, there's just like this sigh that happens, like, thank you.
So yeah, and this a really, really powerful thing to help the people with, because this like having uh, getting them clarity and getting them this relief is like, okay, this is going to take that much weight off their shoulders out. So
And also, I mean, usually course creators are experts in something, right? Like content, like branding, or, this like health training program, or, fitness and exercise. And they know that material really well, but they don't have the expertise in how do I, the training element or the learning element or the decision-making element, or, that other side of things. And that's the aspect that I really love. Like the content, it's like, as long as it's interesting, I'm like, all right, that's cool. But I really love thinking about how people tick and how they learn, and like, how do we motivate them? And, what's the emotional component here? And how do we take advantage of that? And how are we sensitive to that? And how do we support people through, like difficult emotional transformations and all of these different aspects? And so those are like the questions that, like, in a good way, like I love mulling over. Like I love getting a client who has a new problem and I'm like, ooh, I haven't tackled this one before. And it just like lets my mind just like mull over it. And I send them Voxers at odd hours of the day, being like, I have 4 new ideas. That's what I'm really good at. And so I love finding out where the problems are, like auditing your work, figuring out where the problems are, and then coming up with really creative solutions to them. And so let me do what I'm good at, let you do what you're good at, and it should be better for everybody involved, hopefully.
Yeah, and yeah, just by you telling this, how you tell, we could see that you are passionate about helping them and figuring out these problems. So we could see just by how you tell, how you speak about this. Okay, so please tell the audience how they can connect with you and learn more about your work and how you can help them.
Yeah, so the best way to connect with me is by just connecting on LinkedIn. If you are in any way interested in learning more about the work I do, just send me a DM. I have a range of different things that I've done with clients. And particularly in the course world, the 2 things that I tend to do is, if you have a small problem and you're like, this just isn't working, we oftentimes will just do one 75-minute session. Let's see how far we can get you in one go. Other people are designing a whole new course, maybe something like a 6-month program. And in that case, I tend to do kind of longer term projects that can range from just auditing what's there, what's going on. That can involve everything from looking over your course materials to kind of talking to past students or past learners, or people in your community, that can also then talk about how do we structure this course? How do we figure out, that delicate balance between making sure that everybody has what they need to make that transformation and nothing more. There's too much of a program is sometimes worse than not enough. And so there's a lot of carefully working that balance. And oftentimes I really love coming up with creative solutions, trying things that nobody's really doing in the online course space. And some of those are actually, really fun and low tech, and saying and I won't go into the details because I'll talk too long, but and then how in that space, where can we give people feedback? Where do they need the kind of feedback that's motivating? Oftentimes, in a long program, people don't see the progress that they're making because they haven't reached their goal yet. And so how do we design a program that they can see all the progress that they're making when they don't see it themselves? How do we reflect that back to them? I could go on and on, but it's really, I think the neuroscience point of view means that I help people with their problems in two ways. One is through just the content. It's I had a woman come to me the other day, and she's like, I want people to design new to create new habits. And I asked her a whole bunch of things about the project, and I was like, this is not a habits problem, this is a learning problem. So the way that we design your course and the feedback is going to be in this a learning way. You don't want to create habits because they're going to be too rigid. Okay, so that's one. On the other hand, I can see that where your average course creator isn't going to see that, or say this is an attentional problem. You need this. You just need attention, and you're not getting attention because this is incredibly boring. So we're gonna tackle that in a totally different way. Apologies for Brooklyn outside. The other issue is that I come at it thinking scientifically, and scientists ask a lot of questions because we want to get to the heart of the issue and understand it really well. And once we understand that issue, it's we experiment and we try new things in that process. I never promise it's going to be these 3 steps, because oftentimes we need to experiment and try a couple things to figure out what works. So if you want me to tell you exactly what to do, I'm probably not the right fit for you. But if you're hey, let's try out some new things and let's work with this and let's make this really good, I'm probably the right fit.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for this conversation, for sharing your tips, your expertise with us. And I really appreciate all the tips and insights that you give us, Kendall. Thank you very much.
All right, well, thank you so much for having me. I hope to come on Strategy NT again.
Thank you. So before we go, if you are a new or aspiring online course creator and you would like to get some strategy, feedback, and accountability, you can join my free community, the Online Course Creator Circle, visiting rememancera.com/community. And that's it for today. Don't forget to take action, to check all the tips that Kendall has given to us, and use the power of feedback to improve your program. Thank you for watching and see you soon. Bye.